Hello, I'm Louisa Smith, the buying director for Book Passage, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our event with author Eric Nguyen to celebrate a novel that we have all fallen in love with, Things We've Lost to the Water. A gorgeous and engaging novel which follows the family of Vietnamese refugees as they make a home in New Orleans. We know you have many choices of virtual events and in-person events these days, and some of you may have spent the entire day on Zoom. So we really thank you for spending your time with us for this special event. If at any time you have questions for Eric, please go ahead and enter them in the chat. We will also be posting a link for Eric's book in the chat and even have some limited number of signed copies available for our lucky customers. Eric Nguyen earned an MFA in creative writing from McNeese State University in Louisiana. He's been awarded fellowships from Lambda Literary, Voices of Our Nation, and the Tin House Writers Workshop. He is the editor-in-chief also of diecritics.org. And in conversation with Eric tonight is Book Passage's own Julie Carlucci. Julie is one of the most brilliant readers I have ever had the pleasure to work with, which is perfect because she runs our first edition book club. If she likes it, you can trust you are going to fall in love with it. I knew that this book was something special as soon as I started receiving multiple texts from Julie telling me this had to be our pick for May. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Eric and Julie and cannot wait to hear this incredible conversation tonight. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Louisa.
Thank you.
That's so generous. And welcome, everybody, especially some of our first edition club members. It's great to have you here tonight. I have been looking forward to this all day and just making sure that I got every question written down because I had so many things to ask. I knew a year ago when Isabel Palad and Viet Thanh Nguyen, pardon me, I know I probably did not get it right, but they gave me the heads up that over a year ago that I had to pick this book up, and so as soon as it came, I did, and we have been going full force, just enthusiastic and just in love with it. So I am just giddy about being here in conversation with you tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be the first edition club pick. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Yeah. So this book, it's been described as panoramic, specific, allegorical, literal, intimate. It spoke to me because the way you were able to convey the emotions and the stress and the trauma of dislocation in a way that I have not experienced before. And just that deep sense of longing to belong. Like I really felt like I was in the kitchen or when they would go back to the apartment complex and all the other refugees that were just trying to start their lives, like I could feel it, I could smell it, I could hear it. And just that urgency to just want to be part of something larger just really rang through. And I think there's a little bit of me, like, I get it. I grew up in witnessing that environment. And so I think it, to see on words on paper and to really be able to conjure that back was so powerful. And that's why you're just a master. It's brilliant. It's art, it's connecting, it's humanity, it's real, it's urgent, all those things. Can't say enough. But what I really thought was unique about it, above all those other things, was how the second generation was brought into it. Because a lot of times the books are written from the post-war narrative from that one perspective. And I thought this was really unique, going into that second generation, because they are the voice of the future. And your day work and your novel kind of weave the importance of that. And so I just wanted you to speak a little bit about that, because I thought that was unique about your story.
Yeah, well, I guess this actually began as a way to kind of chronicle my parents' generations. They were refugees from Vietnam, but growing up, they never talked about their experience, what it was like to leave Vietnam, what it was like to come to America. So I felt this was a personal project to get into that, to look into a possible story that could have been theirs. So like in my head, it was definitely like the first generation story, and how they came to America. But eventually, my character, she had sons, and I felt like they had their own stories. Their stories kind of mirrored my own story as a second generation Vietnamese American. And I felt that they kind of pulled through, and then it just became this. I like the word panoramic kind of story because I do feel like we get that first person, that first generation story, of the mother who left Vietnam as a refugee, but then we also have the sons who didn't really know Vietnam or had never been to Vietnam at all. Like me, I was born in the U.S. and I've only been to Vietnam once, and that was like in high school. So I don't have any memories of like growing up there. So I think like what I hope to do in this book was to really, I guess, show the whole of like the Vietnamese diasporic experiences from people who came here and had to find their own identity, had to survive, as well as the people who were born here who have that Vietnamese heritage, but don't necessarily like connect with that. They connect more with like American culture, because I know like I did when I was growing up. I connected more to like American pop culture, for example, than like my parents' own like Vietnamese cultures.
Mhm. You know, I was so excited about talking to you. I forgot that we had a plan. So I'm going to back up and give our viewers an opportunity to become more familiar with the book. And so um, if you would, honor us or bless us with your reading, that'd be great.
Great. Yeah, just going to read from the first chapter of the book. It's about 2 pages long, and you don't really need to know anything about this because it's the first pages of the book. And I think it really sets the tone of what's going to happen in the next couple of pages within the book. Um, so this is August 1979. New Orleans is at war. The long howl in the sky. What else can it mean? Boom drops the dishes into the sink and grabs the baby before he starts crying. She begins running toward the door, but then she remembers, this time, another son. She forgets his name temporarily. The howl is so loud. What's important is to find him. Is he under the bed? No, he is not under the bed. Is he hiding in the closet? No, he is not in the closet. Is he in the bathroom then? Behind the plastic curtains, sitting scared in the tub. He is not in the bathroom. Behind the plastic curtains, sitting scared in the tub. And as she turns around, he's at the door, holding on to the frame, his eyes watering, his cheeks red. Maya, he cries, Mom. The word reminds Hung everything she needs to know. The next moment, she grabs his hand and pulls him toward her chest. With this precious cargo, these 2 sons, she darts across the apartment, an arrow flying away from its bow, a bullet away from its gun. She's racing toward the door and leaping down the steps, but she can't move fast enough. The air is like water. It's like running through water, through an ocean. She feels the wetness on her legs, the water rising in the sky, the early evening sky, the spotting of stars already, the street red and orange, like a fire, like an explosion suspended mid-air in that moment before the crush, the shattering, the death she's always imagined, until someone yells, stop. Someone tells her to stop. And just like that, the sirens hush, and the silence is violent. It slices, it cuts. Hurricane alarm, Yang says. The old woman drops her cigarette. Just a hurricane alarm, a test, nothing to be afraid of. She reaches over and cups Hung's cheek. What do you mean? Hung asks. A test. They're doing a test in case something happens. Yang says, go home now, Gung. Go home. Get some rest. It's getting late. Home. late, getting, there, late. Who understands? Maybe she does not. 1,000 thoughts are still settling in her mind. Where were the sounds from before? Not the alarm, but the green calls of the grackles, the trees, the whistling breeze, the car speeding past. Where are they now? She notices Tum at the gates. Her eyes light up. Tum ai, she calls. Tum holds onto the bar of the gates and watch 3 boys riding past on bicycles. One stands on his pedals, another rides without hands, but only for a second before grabbing in a panic motion the handlebars. A younger one tries to keep up on training wheels. 3 boys, 3 brothers. Tum ai, Tum calls out. Tum waves as the boys ride leisurely past. When they're gone, he returns, and Tum feels a mixture of pure happiness and comfort and relief. Up the dirt road, a mother and her sons, hand in hand. That's the first chapter.
Oh, wow. Just that I just felt her panic, with the description of the sky on the outside and the sounds and what she's doing and what's going on in her mind. And you just feel that sense of just stress, so much stress. And then you feel the relief, right? You feel it's just I've read it so many times and it still gets you. It's just amazing. So this concept of home, it actually comes out pretty clearly in the reading you read. And I had some questions about the 3 main characters, the mother and the 2 boys, are all dislocated, and it's natural for them to try to bring a sense of balance back and to find home. But the past and their past experiences understand how does that past inform the motivations or play into the motivations of what they want to craft for the future. In your thinking, as you were creating their story, how did you go? What was your process in figuring that out for them?
I think I wanted the past to be like this shared thing everyone in the family has, but they're all kind of free to kind of do what they want with the past. They have like different views of what the past is, like literally and figuratively, the use of the past in their own present lives and what to do with the past going forward. So like I've been like talking about the past as like something that you can hold like a box or something, and what do all these characters do with that box. So we have the mother of the family. She kind of wants to hold on to the box, but she also wants to hide it away, and in some cases she literally does that. And she wants to move forward while hiding that away, but also making sure that it's still there with her, that she knows where it is, that it's secure. The first son, her eldest son, Dong, he kind of wants to take a look at the box. He wants to take a look at the past. He wants to kind of open it and see what's there for him to take, what's very useful for him, from his culture, from his past, from his background, to make his own identity, to make a home for himself in this strange land that he's always trying to find himself in, as the person who's so very different from everyone else around him, as an Asian American, definitely in the South. And then we have the youngest son, Bin, or Ben, as he eventually goes by, and he kind of he's not really aware that the past is there. He kind of just wants to move forward. He never really knows Vietnam because he was born in a refugee camp. He never knew his father. He never actually met his father. So for most of the book, I pictured him as kind of not really caring about the past, this box that all the other characters really want to know more about or want to kind of hide or seek out. He kind of goes his own way until eventually he does kind of remember that there's a box there, a past there, and that opens up like a whole not to like use the box metaphor, but a whole like Pandora box of like events that happen that lead him to his own road again. But like again, he's like more like really future oriented. He kind of moved like really forward compared to like all the other characters. I feel all the characters are kind of they're kind of reminiscent of the time, especially about the father slash husband. While Ben, he's kind of he imagines it and then he goes forward, and that's where his journey eventually takes him. I guess that's why I can say without giving away too much about what happens.
Right. I know we always have to be careful what we say. This idea of this like what another thing that stuck out to me is this I don't know if it's an Asian thing or it definitely was in I understood it because I saw it a lot with the elder with the elder population in my own family, is they kept like everything about the Cultural Revolution. So my family's from China, and I did have some relatives that were sent away, and they ended up, my father was able to get them eventually papers to come over to the US eventually, but they had spent time in these reformation camps. And I remember I wanted, when they first came over, I just wanted to ask him about it because I had taken history classes and I just wanted to know. And I remember just getting the look like, don't even go there. And so I don't, if it's really very much in the culture, like just don't, like just erase it. Just erase it. If you don't mention it, it would never happen. And so that idea of don't mention it, it never happened. And that coupled with the question of, can you forge a future? Can you make a new home if you don't reckon with these things from the past?
Yeah, I think for me it was based like again like your experience. It was something that we didn't talk about. Like I'm not like sure what my own parents like their experience was like if they went to re-education camp or whatnot because like I didn't even know like there was like re-education camps when I was a kid. I just knew like they had to escape, and every time like I would bring it up like how did our family get to the US, they would say that doesn't matter, let's not talk about that and just move forward. So I think like experiencing trauma like I guess firsthand kind of and having to escape it, that's the most important part. I think kind of makes you just want to go forward. But I think as a second generation person, like I definitely felt like personally like I couldn't really move forward as a person, as a Vietnamese American, if I didn't know like all this stuff that happened. And part of the reason, like I said, why I wrote this book was just trying to figure that out of what happened to, if not my parents, then people of my parents' generation, what they've been through. Because going into this, I had like really no idea. I knew like boat people. I knew that there was a war, but like as a teenager, I didn't know what the war was about. I didn't know like what happened after 1975. So this book took a lot of like research into that. And for me, I felt like intensely tied to this project. It was a really personal project because like I felt like I couldn't move on, like you said, I couldn't see like a future for myself as like a Vietnamese American to say that I am Vietnamese American without really knowing that. I think my characters kind of feel the same way. We have the brothers, definitely. We have the older brother. He is basically always has that memory of his father and he's always trying to revisit it. And then eventually he gets into a gang. And that is his way to kind of find the past in the present and trying to work that out. And this other son, Ben, he kind of, for a while, he doesn't know about it until he does find out. And then it leads him to other places. So I think at least knowing some of the story is really important for like identity formation. And it's just knowing where you fit in within not just your local community, but like in the world, like the story of the world itself.
Also, another element that I thought was interesting was your intention in using a blend of English and Vietnamese language in the book. And so what was your intention? What were you trying with that technique? What were you trying to highlight or communicate to the reader, and how did it enhance the story?
I think for me, like putting the Vietnamese in there was kind of natural, because I grew up like in a mostly bilingual household. Like my parents would speak to me in like Vietnamese, and I would answer back in English, and we would both understand each other. I feel like that's just something that happens in bilingual household, no matter like where your family is from. So I really felt like that was really part of like the Vietnamese American experience. It was natural, it was truthful to their story, because it was like the way I grew up. So I intentionally put that in there. Um, and I felt that created a type of realism for the characters, but also kind of grounded like where they are. What I really tried to do was like for the mother and the eldest son Tum especially, they use like Vietnamese more often, more freely compared to Ben, who is not as fluent. There's like a passage I know, like his mother and brother are talking, and he's like in the closet, like literally hearing them talk, and could only like has no idea what they're saying, only knows like by the tone of what they're saying it, like what might be the conversation. So like he uses Vietnamese less often than the other characters, and in that way, like it becomes kind of a gauge of how comfortable they are with their Vietnamese heritage and the past and the relation to the past. So I felt like it was a very useful tool as a writer to have the Vietnamese in there as a way for characters to show their relation to their Vietnamese past.
There's also an element of, I also grew up in a bilingual household, and there also is an element of duality that not everybody grows up with. Not everyone knows. Like I just knew like you had a choice when you sit down for dinner, you can use a chopstick or you use a fork. Or if you, if you want to use the word good in Chinese, you understand there's different ways of saying something, and it's very nuanced depending on like the love. Like for example, love is a parental love, is it a romantic love, is it a toxic love? I mean, there's all these different ways to say it. And then in another language, the formation of where they get good, that concept of good might have totally different roots. Like the concept of good in the Chinese character is of a woman with a son. And so that's just informed. So I just think like growing up bilingual, I think you see the world, I think you always know there's another way, versus like if you don't, you might not even think about it until someone points it out to you. But I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. Reading the book and knowing and having the both languages there was a constant reminder that they live a there's a lot of duality, there's duality in their life. And that also like going into the sense of belonging, you're constantly having to code switch. So how does that impact growing that sense of belonging or nurturing that sense of belonging?
I think like it's partly a struggle for the character, especially Tung, as we see much of his trying to like assimilate to like the people around him in school, for example. So like he's very cognizant of like these two lives, like one in Vietnamese and one in English. Like I don't know if there's like a chapter where he's like thinking in English. I mean, thinking in he was thinking in English, but then he couldn't find a word for it like in Vietnamese. So like there's those two tracks of life. They're almost parallel, but sometimes like they kind of bump to each other. Especially when we're talking about the forgetting of language. And I feel like through that bilingual aspect of the book, it kind of really shows that push and pull of trying to, in his case, trying to find where you fit in, either in like a mainstream English speaking culture, where like we have a school, the people he goes to school with, his bully, for example, and the mostly code switching, really Vietnamese, prideful Vietnamese gang that he grows into and tries to get into. So in that case, language is really a tool to see where you can possibly fit in. And sometimes there's friction, conflict with that. And I think like that is really much, at least like the Vietnamese American experience, like at least my experience. I remember like going to like first grade class, like speaking Vietnamese to like the first Asian person I saw, and like they weren't Vietnamese and they didn't understand. And like that hurt me. I remember it's like I didn't know, like I didn't belong with all the, like the white people, like, and if I couldn't belong with this Asian girl, like who, where do I belong? So like there's that meaning of language means belonging, and what happens when you can't find someone else who don't speak your language, or you find someone who speak your language but they're not really good for you or good to you, like the people in Dom's gang. They're not, they're trouble for him. So it's, I feel like he definitely like walks on the balance beam of language to see where he belongs, and hopefully he finds some place to belong by the end of the novel. I feel like that's up for the reader.
Yeah, yeah. It's again another. It's just masterful how it's not heavy-handed. It's really subtle, but it's very effective. Another area was the water metaphor, and it's water's multifaceted. It's life-giving, it's life-taking, as we have seen in our, very recently. It's it can be, it can morph into it can take all types of form, shape, clear, cloudy, salty, dirty, calm, rough. It ebbs and flows, it swells and recedes. It's just so it's just always changing, and kind of like life, it's just always changing. And in the book, like these, the water does take on these different changes, but the one thing I feel that I think you're trying to say is that the family's constant. And so and then also the water represents the two kind of like big main events: fleeing Vietnam, and then also Katrina, and how the water plays in there. And going back to the title of your book, the things we lose to the water. And so my question to you is like, what do you think, in your experience and your research and looking at this group of very brave people that had been able to come over to the US and make a new life, what do they lose with the water, and what should be saved?
I think just talking about like the Vietnamese refugee, like they've lost a life, like a lot. They lost basically a life that they could have had. Like my characters, we had basically someone who's middle class, Hương and her husband in Vietnam are pretty much middle class. The husband is a professor at a university, and she doesn't have to work really except for inside the house. She's a housewife. She takes care of the bill, but she doesn't have to like work a 9 to 5. So like there's also a level of comfortability that they have a house in Saigon, in the city. So like there's a particular lifestyle that they do lose once their country loses. They lose a country. South Vietnam is wiped out from the map. Essentially, it's not part of a communist Vietnam. So they lose potential, a life they could have had. The characters also lose a father figure, a husband. So we're talking about the literal things that they can lose, but they also lose a culture, a history, especially the sons. They lose that connection to people who are like them, a shared history. Instead, they are put into a place where they have to question where they belong, where people don't particularly look like them, even within their community. I made a point to make this family even more of outsider. Everyone there in Versailles, the community in the book, are all Catholics, for example. But the mother, whom she's really anti-ideology, she doesn't like communists, she doesn't like Catholics. So again, they're also apart from that community as well. So there's a lot of things they lose. And then when Hurricane Katrina comes, we're talking about maybe not just my novel, but like in real life, Hurricane Katrina comes. Lives were lost again, like literal lives. People died, but then lives lost, the livelihood of people. People had to evacuate. So a lot of Vietnamese people who lived in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, they had to experience that loss all over again. And many like New Orleans people from New Orleans. I have a hard time pronouncing, but they left too, and some of them never came back. There's like a New Orleans diaspora even of people who moved from New Orleans to go to like Houston or California, because their lives, the ones that they had, were lost. So I think in those two cases, like water is definitely, I guess, a cause of that loss. In the case of the refugees, they lost their homeland by escaping by water. Some of them died in the water. In Louisiana, hurricanes, people get their stuff lost, their lives lost. So I think for me, it was very natural to take the Vietnamese refugee, Vietnamese American story and set it in Louisiana, where people really understand that dichotomy of water. Like you said, like it can give life, but it can also take it away. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to get more of your thoughts behind the title of the book and how water is weaved throughout. There also, I don't know if I'm like looking for too many, like, you know how sometimes like you overarch and like the writer never intended that, but the reader seems to, you know, I do that sometimes in the books, but important things happen around the water, like the backyard bayou, their backyard with the water, and then also the swimming pool that Ben goes to. There's I don't want to say too much, but there's a life, you know, there's discoveries that are happening at these different places with water. And was that on purpose, or was that just, did you say like, okay, I need water in these areas because, or it just kind of happened because that's the landscape?
I think the first couple of drafts, it just happened. I mean, like the first drafts, you're just like writing, you need to get to like a certain amount of pages to make it a novel. So you just like write and write and write. You then the next draft, like you cut things out, you put things in. But then like eventually I did see like that water motif, like, hey, they live by bayou. Like that was like to me at first that was a coincidence. But then like once I saw that motif, I kind of like, hey, this is interesting. So I kind of leaned into it. So I think like it's definitely the final version is there on purpose, but like writing it, I felt like it just came naturally because it's just part of the landscape. Louisiana has bayous basically everywhere, so it was natural for bayou to show up. Yeah, so I think it was a mixture of like just luck of what happened in my writing process, but also once I found that, I kind of leaned into that and try to craft it more to make it make more sense.
Mm. And then did you also, what were you leaning into when this one line where I think it's Tuan notes that early that describing the water in New Orleans, that it acted differently. So I think the quote is like, out on the shores of Vietnam and beyond, the water had been violent, shaking anything that lay on top of it. But here the water didn't move. It stayed still, lazy. Were you just describing the water, or was there something more behind that?
I think that was always like in there. That's like one of the things that was always in the draft. So at first it was more of something that just describe it, but I think part of me wanted to show like a different experience of water. We have a kid whose only experience for water is really just being on a boat escaping by sea, the roughness of the sea, which we learn more about later. But then he comes to this place and he experiences water, a body of water that is so different from the ocean that he knew back in Vietnam. And bayous by nature are just really slow moving. They're kind of not, like you can like walk into one really, and it doesn't move except for maybe animals under it. So like there's a big contrast between that. But I think throughout the book, I was trying to play with basically the ways water can kind of change. It could be like really violent one moment, and then it could become really calming. It could become life sustaining. It could be pouring in one scene really like heavily, but then another scene it could just be puddles and we're just waiting for it to evaporate. So I think it really goes into my theme of exploring water and the meaning of water and its many like aspects of water, the facets of what it can be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I want to do a little shout out to because I'm hogging all the question space. I realize, but if other people have questions, just put it in the chat box, and it will get over to us, and we'll ask them. I promise, I won't just keep going on with my long list of questions. So go ahead and type in as many questions as you'd like, and we'll get them answered. But in the meantime, going back to the idea of being displaced and having to rebuild your life, which is incredibly daunting. And there's one part in the book where Huang, I think she realizes she expresses that I don't know if she's eating ice cream. I don't know why I think she's eating ice cream, but she realizes she has a sense of like settledness, I think. And I remember writing down this quote. It says, I don't know if she said this, or if you're running from something, you're still running somewhere. So what is that? What does that mean?
Learn from something, you're still learning from somewhere. I think that means, in the case of my characters, I feel, especially for Hung, she ran from physical danger, kindness, and their whole history of oppression, especially with her husband.
Mm-hmm.
She ran away from that. So eventually you can run away from something like that, but you're still running from it because it's a past. Like I said, like the book is really an exploration of what you do with the past. And she's a character who is, even if she's kind of settled, which in that scene she is eating ice cream. You're not making that up. But she's settled, but there's always that specter of her husband, of what they could have had, what they could have been, just there, and she's running from that in a way, because to remember the past and that husband would mean to forget her present life in a way. And at that point, she has a boyfriend then, and like there's like, how can you, in a way, how can you remain faithful to the present if you're always thinking and running from a past, and vice versa? So I think it was my exploration of just what does the past mean and how do you negotiate the meaning of the past with a present life, even if you're settled down, even if you're comfortable with where you are. Like, what do you do with that past? And how can you make sure it doesn't intrude in a way that stops you from moving forward? I think the important part is like, just for my characters at least, it's just that momentum to move forward, to find identities or lives of their own despite this past trauma that they had.
Yeah, there's a talking about that, like going back to her life in Vietnam, which was it's a really good life. It was a good life. There was one part that she's bitter, and I think I wrote it down here. with some bitterness that certain people who stay in Vietnam actually ended up with more wealth and career success than those who risked their lives to reach the free world. I remember reading that thinking like, yeah, I would be bitter. I would be wondering, that would kind of shake me after witnessing everything that she's had to go through to get back to a spot where it's still maybe not on par to what she had left, but then other people had stayed and actually have a better life. Like what were you what were you trying to inject with that thought?
I think like there's with like immigration, just moving to a different place, especially to a different country, there's always this narrative that you're going there to make a better life for yourself. But that isn't always the case, especially for like refugees who basically they left like at the last moment as possible. They just need to escape anywhere. Like my characters, like they didn't know where they would end up. They just know they need to get out. They took that risk, and that risk meant surviving. But was that risk, was it worth it in a way? If some people stay behind and they actually got this extravagant life from staying there. So I guess I was working against like that kind of narrative that there's only like one way to be an immigrant or refugee, and kind of complicate this meaning of fleeing and what people risk, and what happens eventually. You don't always get what you want, what you plan for. And I think like there's one passage, if I remember correctly, like things never turn out the way you plan, basically. Like that's what, like I think that's what the mother tells her son, like things never turn out the way you plan. Have I taught you that? And I think like that's one of the things like in like refugees, the refugee experience is that you kind of plan your way out, but after that, your life is kind of left to fate, really. And I guess like that's just life. You don't really know where you'll end up. You can plan as much as you want. And I think my characters in a way kind of plan what they want. Like one son plans to get into a gang, another son plans to kind of move away. But their plans don't exactly turn out the way that they wanted to. So I think the more universal point I was trying to get at was that lives happen. You can plan all you want, but it's not going to happen the way you want it. And that's kind of the tragedy in it. You can't map out what you want. It just happens. And that's, I feel like writing that passage that you spoke about, I felt like there was a sadness in that. Like just like if, like knowing like if you left somewhere because you wanted a better life, and then you come back and then you're still like the poor person compared to everyone else. I feel like there's an ironic tragedy in there that I wanted to explore.
Yeah. No, it really it provoked a lot of thought and contemplation. That line, those couple lines, because it's true, and you've been as a reader through her journey of what it's taken her to get here, and then to know that that was on the flip side, that was an option. It's like a dull, it's a sharp and dull pain, and it's not just for a nanosecond, it lasts, so it's real. Okay, we have a question. I will pause on mine for a second. From Katie Kuhn, she asked, do you hope to reach other Vietnamese still in the homeland? It must be a fascinating contrast. Do you hope to reach other, do you hope to reach other Vietnamese still in the homeland? It must be a fascinating contrast.
So I guess the people still in Vietnam, do I wish that they get to read my book? Um, I'm not sure. I feel like on the one hand, like my like the experience like is in this book is very American. I'm not sure like how understandable it would be. Like in my mind, like the ideal reader for this book, like when I find it out, would be like me, like someone who's trying to learn more about their history. Like so, I guess in a way, I was writing this for myself, um, and like trying to figure that out. So like I'm not sure like how it would be received in Vietnam. But then like as a writer, as someone who like reads like literature for like in different cultures, like you do hope like a really specific and particular story can reach an audience that's so different and they could find something universal in it. I think like that's like the goal of all writers is just to be very specific in what they write, but then like have a universality in it that other people, no matter what culture they grew up in, maybe what language they grew up in, that they can somehow relate to. So I think like besides like the refugee experience, like I if they do read it, I kind of hope like they get that universal experience of loss, being out of place in a community. Um, yeah, I think like that's the universal experience that's really like part of this very particular story of Vietnamese refugees, Vietnamese Americans.
Yeah. Okay, I have a couple more I'm gonna squeeze in. One of the things I love about my job is working with the debut authors or just being able to, be in this like, the boxes come and you have these debut authors and I love it because the ideas are so fresh and it's not there because it's a marketable concept. It's new, it's fresh, and it's original. And but then I've also seen like there's some authors that they always are kind of saying the same. They almost have like they're born with a message. They're born with something they want to put out in the world. And it not just authors. I think musicians are like this. I think artists are like this, like or all humans. It doesn't matter if you find that creative outlet to express your message or whatever it's in you that you're born with. And so I was wondering if you felt that way. I know it's early in your career, but do you like what is your observation with that and thought behind that?
I think definitely writers have like their obsessions, artists have their obsessions. I know like there's like a saying or someone said it that basically writers write the same book over and over again in their careers because like they're usually tackling the same themes, even if they're not even thinking about doing the same thing. There's always that personal perspective, that personal stake in each story they tell of what they're exploring. So I think like I didn't know what that was before I wrote the book, but once I started writing the book, and once I started writing a second book already, and like I'm working through like what are my own writerly obsessions, and like I'm starting to understand them. So I guess like I would revisit some of the themes that you see in this book again, but hopefully like in different ways. I wouldn't want to be like the person who has like a planned message of what I want to do, but more of like something I want to explore, questions that I kind of come back to again. But each book has like a different answer, a different way to look at that question. Because I really feel like each book, each piece of like story, each art piece is kind of an attempt to answer a question that one might have. Like in this case, I was trying to answer the question of what was it like for my parents. The bigger question might be, what is it like to have a past and what do you do with a past? So I think those kind of questions are the ones that, as I work on my second novel, kind of the same questions that I want to answer again. But I feel like that's the answer I can give you at this moment. I feel like that answer will kind of change throughout my hopefully long career, just because I don't know, people change. I think you see that as they write books as they make art.
Yes, yes. It will be interesting. Well, hopefully we will come back and reference this conversation one day and be able to ask, well, 20 years ago. We have a couple more questions. Harmony Miller asks, can you please share the reaction of members of your own family to your book?
No one in my family has read it. I feel like in my family, like I'm the son or brother, and then I cut off at writer. Like those are two separate lives for me. So they haven't read it. Also, my parents, they don't read English, so they wouldn't know like how to access this. So there's like no Vietnamese translation yet. So maybe in the future. But like my sibling, I know my brother has the book. He's very excited about it. He hasn't read it yet, or at least he hasn't told me that he finished it yet. So I'm still waiting to hear back from him, but hopefully it's good. But I guess my main hope is to make them proud. It's not their story, but it is a book about family, I feel. So I feel like it sits in that area with them of that family feeling. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't believe they haven't read it. I almost give me their number. Like they need to know. Okay. Another question is from Captive Reader. What writers have influenced you? Whose work do you admire?
I think the writers that I kind of return to a lot, like I feel like they're my go-to people. Like if I see them in the bookstore and I haven't had that book yet, or if they had a new book out, I would like buy it without like even reading what it's about. Like I'm thinking of like Louise Erdrich. She's like amazing. Like I feel like the structure of like love medicine is really like what grounded me in writing this book, like what I kind of aspired to. I haven't gotten there, but like I feel like that's like the book that's closest to my heart. Edwidge Danticat is also a writer I also really admire. She does wonderful things, usually speaking about the Haitian diaspora. Um, and Ann Tyler is another writer who does a lot of things with family, kind of some people would say like the mundane aspect of domestic family life, but I feel like she explores it in such a way that makes it feel so real, so emotionally visceral. And I feel like I try to get that to that same point in her books and as well like in my own writing. And like she's someone I admire, and again, someone who like I buy books automatically when I see them.
Wow. That's very telling. Okay, I have one last question, and it goes back to the work that you do with Devon and working with other writers to tell their story. And the goal, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the goals is to widen the story that are associated with the Vietnamese community. And because it's not just the post-war story, like that's not going to resonate with generations down the line. It's more of the stories of the second, third, and fourth generation that need a platform. And can you explain a little bit of your motivation with what you guys are trying to do? I think it's good for people to understand that we need to let other groups fully spread their wings and express themselves and show up as the kaleidoscope of the community they are, versus always putting them in a box.
Yeah, so Diacritics is a publication of DVAN, which is the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network. I think I got that right. Basically, our goal is to, like you said, expand what it means to be Vietnamese, or like expand the Vietnamese diasporic experience. I think a lot of times when we speak about Vietnam, just the word Vietnam, we think automatically of the war. Like if you type in Vietnam in Google, most likely you'll get articles about the Vietnam War. And I think when Nguyen and Isabel Pulad started DVAN, they really wanted to put the Vietnamese experience, the Vietnamese diaspora experience front and center. So this means putting their experience of the war, of the migration front and center compared to narratives of the Vietnam War from the American perspective. But that also means expanding the narrative of what is Vietnamese American. So that means speaking about other stuff beyond the war, being like, for example, a Vietnamese American woman or a Vietnamese queer person. There are so many stories out there in the Vietnamese diasporic experience that have nothing to do with the war, and especially as like my generation who was born in the US and the generation after us, we are less connected to that war, to that experience of leaving a country. We have other experiences. We have new experiences of growing up in urban areas, growing up in rural areas. So Diacritics is really this place to highlight these other stories of different ways of being Vietnamese diasporic. Lieutenant Nguyen uses the phrase narrative plentitude, which is basically meaning there's different narratives out there, not just one single narrative. And that is the goal of Diacritics. So we publish a lot of essays, fiction, poetry from different voices, not just in the US, but around the world.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful organization to have, and much needed. I hope other groups are able to have that kind of support that you're giving to your community. So I think we are close to time.
That was amazing, guys. That was amazing. And I love that you ended with talking about the work that Divan is doing. I saw the announcement today about the new imprint, Ink and Blood. Very excited about that. Are you going to be involved with that?
I'm not really involved with that, but I'm excited to see where it goes. I've known about it for a couple of months, and to see the announcement, and like kind of makes it more real. And I'm really excited to see where it goes.
It's going to be incredible. And you know, Viet's book, The Sympathizer, was a first edition club pick as well. Cool. So we feel like he's one of ours. We have a little claim to him. We love his work. And I loved hearing what you said about how art is an attempt to answer a question. And I feel like I'm going to go with that frame in mind when I look at artists, writers that I love, and I look at their work over time, like what question are they answering? Which different ways are they looking at it? And how do they evolve? And it's going to be really fun to see what you do in the future and how you choose to answer the questions that you find important in your life. So this is a wonderful start. We are so, so happy that you could be here tonight. And we think this is a brilliant, brilliant book. So thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Eric, so much. And thank you, Nick, who's behind the scenes, making sure that we look professional and are running time and it'd be a mess otherwise. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Really, really rush out, get a copy of Eric's book. And I believe there's a link in the chat. We do have signed copies, like I said, and it's something that you're going to treasure for a long time. So getting that signed copy is going to be very meaningful for you, I promise. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.